How do you do again? Today we're going to talk about Angela and ministry and Angela and discernment. And today we have the joy of two Amy's, Amy Olson and Amy Knoll. And we're going to have at it. So if I say Amy, they can decide which one I'm talking to.
Sounds like a plan.
Yes. Okay. First, I want to talk about Angela and ministry. I reread the chapter, and I was really pleased that I could focus again on something that I think is very important in ministry, because I'm around a lot of ministers of various kinds. Mm-hmm. And a refrain that goes through everything they say is, "I'm so busy." Mm-hmm. And it's like, get over it. Angela says about ministry, I think it is so interesting that she said that. This charge ought not to be a burden laid on you. And I talked to a number of deacons, and if anybody tells me how busy they are, it's deacons. Mm-hmm. And I said to the one gentleman what Angela had said, this charge ought not to be a burden to you. And then I realized that comment from her comes out of all the other things we've talked about, out of her spirituality. First of all, who she thought God was, and who she thought she was. She thought of herself as beloved by God, and she called God my lover of us all, which includes, all of us. Mm-hmm. And so, if love puts a charge on us, it isn't burdensome. Mm-hmm. I think that all parents should be canonized. I don't know if you've ever told you this or not, mm-hmm. because what love does is focuses you on the other. And I don't know any parents who are self-centered. You can't be. You don't have time mm-hmm. to be self-centered when all of your attention is on this little one whom you love. I mean, that's love. And so that isn't a burden, I guess, to get up at 2 o'clock in the morning mm-hmm. and feed the baby or change pants 20 times a day because it comes out of love. Mm-hmm. That's so important for all of us to remember, like, why am I doing this? Mm-hmm. Which talks about ministry. Angela never uses the word ministry because it was not a word in vogue in her time. She talked about service, serving others, and that's what ministry is. But it also comes out of her spirituality. Knowing God is the one who loved her, and knowing herself as both loved and sinner, does something about who she thinks other people are. They're worthy, they're lovable, mm-hmm. and she wants to, we'd say minister, she would say serve, I think, mm-hmm. the others, because it comes out of love, which keeps it from being a burden laid upon you. You're shaking your head. You know what I mean. Yes. You both have children, mm-hmm. And you're both teachers, or you deal with mm-hmm. teachers. And I've heard you all talk so much about the joy of being with your students mm-hmm. and how you like them, which is in Angela's words. She wants us to know one another and love one another mm-hmm. out of a place in our heart that is particular to each one. I think that's hard to do when you're dealing with the whole school, mm-hmm. or the whole school plus their parents and outsiders as well. I mean, mm-hmm. it's hard to do, but I think people do that. Mm-hmm. Each one who comes in is different, so you don't say to the one what you say to the next one, whether they be teacher or parent or student, mm-hmm. because each one is different, and we have them engraved in our hearts, one by one. which is the ultimate, I think, of service. But you also see how it comes out of Angela's spirituality. She was one who loved others and who knew she was loved and who was sensitive to the environment, though she never, ever says that. That was not a word in their vocabulary at that time. But being a farm girl, she knew about taking care of plants, hoping that the sun shone at the right time and the water came at the right time. So while she never spoke of the environment, she dealt with it lovingly.
And do you think that's why people were drawn to her?
Absolutely.
They sensed that when they were around her?
Yes. Would you approach somebody who was mean and grouchy with people and dismiss them? Hardly. I mean, we are attracted to people who are loving.
Yes.
Even if they're loving in their own style. We've talked so much about, who comes from a German background and who comes from an Italian one, or how affection is shown. Well, those are all different styles of hospitality. But whether or not you are effusively welcomed or whether or not you're politely welcomed, you still know that the person is lovable and loving, and so it's not a burden to be with them. In fact, I remember way long ago when I used to be a teacher, somehow the students who gave me the most grief, behavior-wise and learning-wise, somehow became special, and I seemed somehow to love them more. They needed more, I think. Yes, one of our sisters who was a supervising teacher would say to us, always find something good about every child. And she told us about one little boy. She really had a hard time. She said, I looked and looked and listened. I could not find anything good about the little kid. She said, I really had a hard time loving him. And then I noticed that every day his shoes were shined. So I always focused on that. I loved him especially because his shoes were shined. That only lasts for so long until a deeper kind of love happens. But for her, that was the beginning, to find something about each child that she loved and could help her to love the child more. Anyway, so out of that, ministry is about loving and outpouring. We talk about Angela's charism of that contemplative love for God with an openness and eagerness to serve the needs of others. And that's all about ministry. That's what that is. Okay, so from there I want to transition to what I think is one of the most important things that any person has ever taught other people, and that is discernment. I'm not sure she ever used that word. It's more than about making a decision. If I want a new job, or if I should wear this red dress or this blue dress, it's not about those kinds of choices. It's a way of life. So if the discernment is coming out of a loving heart, then that's going to be where the weight is. Like, where am I most loving? To whom am I attracted? And what kind of ministry attracts me where it touches into my loving heart? The basis for this is Angela's chapter in her rule on obedience, because discernment is connected to obedience. And she said something that was just not acceptable in her day, especially by the hierarchy, because she says, first of all, she says, obey God, obey the church, obey the Pope and the bishops and your parents. And then she kind of names all that, And then she says, but above all, I always think that should have stars by it, because whenever she uses that, when she talks about almost everything, but above all, she says, pay attention to that one, because this is where it's really at. So she says, but above all, obey the inspirations of the Holy Spirit, which will be constantly heard in your heart. Now that's dangerous, because that you might be inspired to do something that would not be a good thing.
Or the norm of the time.
Yes. But see, she always adds a caveat. She says, your conscience, obey your conscience, which is made more pure, always. Always to hold your conscience, your approach to life, I guess. Let it be purified. That's hard. How will I let my conscience be purified? Well, I find a test for that in politics, because I want to judge politicians, leaders, harshly if I don't like them. But if I let my heart be purified, I may find an opening to love those people as my conscience gets purified, made more holy. Holy as in whole. Because if my heart is really whole, it has lots of room. And then it can love more kinds of people. So I let that happen. I don't know if I let it happen. It happens. Life will do that to you. Think of yourselves now. You started out and your baby was the most beautiful, the most precious child there ever was. Don't tell me any different. And when you get to be grandmothers, I think that gets worse or better, however you look at it. But if you only held your baby and didn't let it go and grow and go out of the house and make its own friends, you're killing the child instead of loving it. So love has this way of spreading out. And see, that changes us. It really does. You think of yourself, all the things that you have changed in your life about what you accept and whom you accept. I always think about homosexuality when we get to it. That's one of those sticking points for a lot of people. And I always think, may you be blessed by a gay son or lesbian daughter. Then you'll find out. You'll find out what happens when love comes into that situation. Changes the whole thing. I've seen it happen in my own family, for one place, but all of a sudden it breaks that open. If my son has always been lovable, and he's gay besides, he's still lovable because he's my son and I've always loved him, and so I'll just love him being gay. And if I love him being gay, look out, because that opens the door for the sons of everybody else who also are gay and lovable. So that kind of purification happens to us as we live our lives, especially as we live our lives in faith. Because Jesus did not put stipulations. I'm not going to love that group. He would have got rid of the Pharisees right away and some of the other hangers-on, but he didn't do that. He left that open because his conscience was certainly purified and well developed. So the first thing about discernment is to allow our hearts to be purified. Now, many saints have given us methods of discernment. I think especially of Saint Ignatius. I don't know if it's because he was a man, but he gave rules for discernment. You do it this way. If this happens, then you do it this way. he had it all laid out, which is wonderful. Much too complicated for a lot of people. Angela didn't do that. So if you search through her writings, as I've really tried to do that to see, does she give any hints about decision making? Well, she says, consult the company. That's the first thing that I think about. Ask other people, because if you are just asking yourself, some wise person said, if you're only consulting with yourself, you're consulting with a fool. So to broaden that sense of who are the wise people that you know, you consult with them. I tried that once. Actually, I tried it many times. In my heart, I had wanted to open a place to pray in the city, because that's, really what Angela did. She loved the world. She didn't renounce it. She stayed with it. So I said, I'd really like to open a house of prayer in the city. So the people I would consult were the people I was living with. And glory be to God, they were all the novices, because I was novice director at the time. So I brought it up. And the one young woman looked at me and she said, that's really dumb. She said, you can't possibly do that. You'd never make it. Well, that was a challenge in some ways, but it also gave me pause to, pare down some of my great aspirations. But it was in my heart to do this, so I did it in a different way from the way I had started. And I did that for 10 years. And it made an impression on the neighborhood, though the neighbors never came, but they knew we were there. And they always greeted me like they knew what was going on in that house, and they respected that. So I don't care what the novices said. It made an impression on people. So consult the company. Maybe it's your spouse. Maybe it's your children, because they have a different view of the world than you have, whether you like that or not. But, okay, so she says to do that, consult the company. First thing, really, is pray. And she says, pray earnestly. I don't know what that means exactly. Pray earnestly. Aren't all prayers earnest? But I guess some of them are more earnest than others, with some kind of a passion to it. So she says, pray earnestly. And then she says something that people really have a hard time doing. It's like, try it out. And if it doesn't work, adjust it. Because she doesn't say that's a dumb thing, you shouldn't have even started it. It's rather, no, adjust it. Don't give up that big, deep desire that's in your heart to do something. You have to adjust it to reality. So those are about all that she said about what you could call discernment. I like what she says, if it turns out badly, don't repeat it. That's, she doesn't say you should never make a mistake.
Right.
Because most of us, the hardest thing to get off the human tongue is, I made a mistake. It won't come off.
That's true.
If you notice, certain people always want to blame somebody else.
Yes.
The devil made me do it. It's like, I didn't do that. Something else made me do that. But to say openly, I really made a mistake. That was the wrong thing to have done. That's a wonderful gift, because how will we ever learn to go in a better way? When a child falls down, they get back up, and they don't say, my shoes were too slippery, or whatever. They get up. They make a change in their behavior, but they don't blame anybody. They just say, I didn't do that, or I couldn't do that. Go jump 10 feet. That's a great idea, but I can't do that. And if I did, that would be a mistake. And I'd have to say, I should not have done that. So her rules for discernment are really kind of easy. Pray earnestly, which means you really must want it. And you always pay attention to what you really want. And then consult the company. Don't go it alone. And learn from your mistakes. And don't be afraid to say, I made a mistake. Right now, I'm reading the lives. This is my going project right now. I'm reading the lives of all the presidents. And it is very interesting because some of the presidents would not learn from their mistakes. And some of them really did. This was the wrong maneuver. I think George Washington did that, probably with more grace. He was a wonderful person to be with his troops, but some of his battles were really dumb. And afterwards, he realized that and didn't repeat that. So I think he was a great man because, among other things, he learned from mistakes. Anyway, so pray earnestly, consult the company, and maybe that's an evaluation. Evaluate your choices. And if they're not good ones, then say, I made a mistake, and do something differently.
Do you think when you say the pray earnestly, is that your connection into that conscience when you talk about following your own conscience is if God is the voice of our conscience, is the pray earnestly the first, like consult yourself, consult your conscience, then measure that with the input from those you trust.
Yes.
And weigh all of that. I mean, sometimes I wonder, can that be, what do you do when there's a discrepancy? So you pray earnestly and you have this, in your conscience, you feel this is what you should do. How do you balance that when maybe those you trust or those you love the most might see it differently, or maybe you think you're following your conscience and you're really following something else?
Yes.
So how do you balance all of that, or how do you determine which is what? Does that make sense?
Yes, very much so. And Saint Angela says, pay attention to the way it turns out. That's how, if it doesn't turn out right, well, then that was, you don't repeat that. You learn from that. I think Washington did that.
Yeah. So you have to go full circle. So you have to be willing to make the mistakes.
You're right.
Which is tough, right? Don't you think that's tough? You just said it's hard to have that off our tongue. So, but it sounds like you have to go this full circle and take that risk, and be willing to make the mistake.
Yes, exactly. And you can do that as long as you remember who God is and who you are. Then it's okay. It's okay to make a mistake because it's safe to do that.
And I was wondering with the pray earnestly, if it's really praying to God about what you think you want to do, but not forcing that prayer like, I need X, Y, and Z, but really turning it over to Him. If that's the praying earnestly piece, like, I trust you enough.
Yes.
This is what I'm thinking, however.
Instead of a prayer, give me this, give me this, give me this. Because I think that's one of the challenges of a prayerful life, is what that looks like. Because in some ways it can look like a list of, I need you to give me this, 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 and this. But is it really the earnestness of it, the idea of keep me open to all the possibilities or to what may be? That's tough.
It's very tough.
Maybe not demanding in our prayers, but more
Yeah.
But again, that comes out of
Yeah.
who God is and who you think you are. If I think that God is loving and forgiving, then it's more about relationship than it is things.
Right.
I don't know if I told you this story about a gentleman who came to me one time because his wife said that if you don't get spiritual direction, I'm going to leave you. What a burden for him.
Oh, wow.
So I always ask people, what do you want? What do you really want? And he squirmed around and he said, well, I want a raise. And he said, I guess I can't ask for that. I said, I don't know why you can't ask for that. So as weeks, months went on, we talked about all kinds of things. One time he came in and he said, you won't believe what happened. He said, my daughter, who never, ever, ever does this, called me and asked me if I would come over and help her and her husband to build a bookcase. He said, never has she ever asked me to do something like that. He said, I went over, helped them with a bookcase, and we had a few beers together, and we just sat and talked. And then it dawned on me, and I think on him, that what he really wanted was a relationship with his children because they had all left home right away. And he wanted a raise so that he could keep his youngest daughter at home because he could send her to college and she could stay at home. When that dawned on me, and I think on him, it changed the whole equation. His desire under the other desire was for relationship, a loving relationship with his children. That's why knowing what your desire is so important. So if you have a Christmas wish list when you pray, then think about where does that come from? What's that for? Because underneath the desire for the big Christmas list is another more important desire. And that brings me to, we've talked about this before, I think. You can call it all kinds of things, but you can call it, St. Ignatius calls it an examen of consciousness, not conscience, but consciousness. Like, where have your awarenesses been? Like, what are you aware of? And where do desires come out of that awareness? There's a story about Moses. You probably saw the Ten Commandments 20 times, where Moses receives the Ten Commandments, and he had told the people about what they should do and not do. And he goes up to the mountain, and God gives him the Ten Commandments. And he comes down, and the people are worshiping a golden idol. A golden calf. So he's furious, and he throws the tablets down and throws the calf off the altar and beats it up and screams at the people, and he pouts up to the top of the mountain. And he said to God, why did this happen? How did you let this happen? Talk to me. He said, talk to me like man to man. Show me your face. And God said to him, gently and lovingly, I'd have said, you dummy, but God didn't. He said, Moses, you cannot see my face and live, but I'll show you what I'll do. He said, I will hide you in that cave over there and put my hand in front of you to protect you, and then I will go past you, and you will see my glory coming after me. I will trail my glory past you. Now, that is a wonderful invitation to all of us to pay attention to our lives. One good question to ask yourself every day is, where did God trail his glory in my life today? Now, what that does, if you keep on doing that, it's like that's part of the conscience purification. Right now, out of that window is a good sign of God's glory. Not only have we had a lot of rain, though we need some right now, but the trees have responded. They seem so much fuller than usual. It is so beautiful just to drive through the park or driving through your own neighborhood. It's like, there's God's beauty, there's God's love, there's God's fidelity. And so that's how God trails his glory past us in so many ways. You know, there are people that you meet every day, and you get so used to how good they are that you don't pay attention to it. But I look at you all, I don't know you deeply, but what I see of you is a concern for other people, an energy to do that, and a joy. And if that isn't part of God's glory, I don't know what is. So the goodness of other people certainly trail God's glory. And if I start looking for that, that alters my way of looking at people. And when it comes to making decisions or discerning a choice or whatever, that alters that. And see, that's part of what Angela says. Obey the Holy Spirit, constantly speaking in your heart. And so you have to pay attention, because you know how it is to have somebody talk, and you don't even know what they're saying.
Right.
Because it bombards you, and you can't pay attention. And to think that God is constantly in our heart means we really have to pay attention. And what we're looking for, we will find.
And that kind of wraps back to what you started with about the busyness.
Yes.
And the burden of ministry and that busyness of it. Because if you're really paying attention, it's in the busyness that we don't pay attention.
Exactly.
And so when you say that, I'm taken back to the beginning of our discussion, and it seems quite simple, but it's not something I really think of. Sometimes the truth is so simple.
Most of the time it is.
And so when you think that in the busyness, we think, in our modern world, we're always multitasking. I can multitask. I can do all of these things. But what we lose is that paying attention, that trail of glory, that really just even taking the time to stop and look at out the window and see the beauty, or walk through this campus, walk through the park and see that beauty. But all of those ways, that's there's so much truth there, and it seems so simple, but not always easy.
That's right.
And I think society and our daily life really encourage you to be busy. There's a sense of glory in daily life if you're really busy. You're earning your keep. And I think sometimes we busy ourselves.
And also there's a self-promotion.
We lose that. Yeah, self-promotion, absolutely.
Yeah. Yesterday we saw Aladdin.
Oh.
I don't know if you've seen the movie.
The actual movie. I haven't seen it, but I've heard about it.
It's beautiful.
It's beautiful.
Like all those Disney stories is good versus bad.
Yes.
It's always that. That's what all great literature is. That.
Right.
But this is really played out vividly. I mean, you can't miss the good, the bad. But there is such reflection possible, like what was under all of this, what was going on, the struggle between good and evil. If you pay attention to that, your conscience gets purified. Because nobody would like to be like that evil prince who had a tattletale parrot that told him everything. We don't want to be like that. We'd rather be a thief, like Aladdin was, because he was at heart very generous to people. So it's like, take a look at that. And yes, that movie was busy. There's so much dancing and so much color and so many explosions. You kind of get overwhelmed. It's like, I got to step back from this and figure out what's really going on. Anyway, so yeah, we have to step back from our lives once in a while, every day, and say, as you go to sleep, where was God trailing his glory in my day today? Or once in a while, where has God trailed his glory in my life? All the choices that have brought me to where I am, that all enhances my ability to discern. It's much more than, am I going to wear this blue dress or whatever. It has to do with what is bringing me life. It's all about life. It's all about love. Where is this? And every day counts. Every day, every day. It's wonderful. You breathe every day. So we can do this every day. Anyway, so we have talked about ministry, which comes out of our spirituality, which leads us into a discussion or reflection on discernment and the great gift that we have of being able to discern what our true desires are. Get under the Christmas list, or pay attention to the Christmas list and get under it. What is it that you're really wanting? So, is there anything else you want to say?
Let's see.
I'll write that down. I like that you talk about the desires of that Christmas list. So that's another form of that discernment or that contemplation, is looking at what desire, and I like your example with the gentleman, that in learning that here's the list, here's that more tangible something that I want, God give me this. But when you spend that time really contemplating what's the desire underneath that, and I think that's very helpful.
It's also very rewarding. You know, it's God's love calling us to see with his eyes and purify our lives so that we can discern more quickly. And if we're used to doing that day by day by day, it gets easier.
Right.
Okay, thank you very much. And I think the next time, I don't know what we're going to talk about. We'll find out when we do it.